Though the Royals haven't played well, I'm going to tell you why it's not time to hit the panic button just yet. We'll dive into it in this edition of Locked On Royals.
You are Locked On Royals, your daily Kansas City Royals podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
You are tuned into another edition of Locked On Royals in the Locked On Podcast Network. As always, I'm your host, Jack Johnson, and you can find me on Twitter or X at JohnnyJ_15. That's at JOHNYJ_15. You also can find us on wherever you get your podcast. That can be Spotify, Apple Podcast, Amazon Music, Google Podcast. We're on Odyssey, and we're on YouTube. Just be sure to hit that follow button and subscribe. If you're a first-time listener and you want to know a little bit more about me and this show, I am based here in Kansas City. I work at Sports Radio 810 WHB, doing some hosting, some co-hosting, and a little bit of producing as well. But when it comes to this podcast, when you click on this link, you know that you're going to be getting 30 straight minutes of Royals baseball. Today's episode is brought to you by Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONMLB for $20 off on your first purchase. I do know last night I wasn't able to bring you guys an episode. It was after a very emotional night on social media as the Royals fell an extra inning to the Tigers, losing that series, and now they go into tonight's game trying to avoid a sweep. But here's what I'll tell you about missing an episode on Tuesday. And for you first-time listeners, if you were not familiar of what our schedule is like, we bring you episodes Monday through Friday, but if there ever is a day in which I can't bring you an episode, I'll either double up on one of the days or I'll try to do an episode on Saturday or Sunday. So we do get that 5-episode count throughout the week. So debating on my schedule after the game tonight, might be bringing you a second episode. If not tonight, I will be bringing you one on Sunday to kind of recap that Giants series and look ahead to the final week of the regular season for the Royals. So expect it that way. You'll have today's episode. If there's a lot to go over tonight and I can get away from my schedule a little bit this evening, might be able to bring you a second episode tonight, but wanted to make sure I at least made up for last night not getting one and getting you to an episode before today's game. So if you want to watch this for your preview leading up to the Royals and Tigers, I don't fault you. But let's go to a little bit of last night and take a pulse, take a heartbeat on this fan base with 10 games to go. I understand last night was a infuriating game. It was infuriating to me. No way to sugarcoat it. I don't think I could put a positive spin on last night's game other than Cole Reagans looked really good and the crowd looked pretty good. That was about it. Offensively, the Royals missed countless opportunities, and we were coming off an episode in which we talked about the Royals not being able to cash in on some golden opportunities. And I think you look at these first two games, the Royals should have won both. Not that they led in game two, but you have bases loaded and one out. Michael Massey grounds into a double play. A few innings later, you got a bases loaded situation with 2 outs and Tommy Pham pops up. You got to get a big hit in a situation like that. And I understand that Detroit has the best bullpen in baseball since about the middle of August. It feels like the American League Central just has lights out bullpens. And it's weird that the Twins went into the year with probably the strongest bullpen, and yet they're the third strongest bullpen because of how Detroit and Cleveland have looked. Cleveland's got a historic stretch, but we'll see how far that takes them into the postseason. But this opening segment is about a panic button. And I'm sure for a lot of fans after last night, you had that hand hovering on a panic button because Detroit is gaining ground and they're gaining serious ground. The point of today's episode, or at least in this first segment, is to take your hand off the panic button. And that there isn't a reason, even with a loss tonight, to smash that panic button and say the season's over. So if you can give me these next 6 minutes or so, we'll probably talk about it into the second segment as well. The Royals, before tonight's game, which is why I wanted to get this episode out before tonight's game, they have a 3-game lead on Detroit in the standings, but it's technically 4 because of the tiebreaker. And no matter what happens tonight, the Royals own that tiebreaker over the Detroit Tigers. So let's say in this scenario, the Tigers win tonight. Tarek Skubal's on the bump. Alec Marsh on the bump for Kansas City. A Cy Young Award winner should beat the Royals tonight. Even though the Royals have had their number, you play the odds. Do the Royals get Tarek Skubal 3 times this year? I mean, he's allowed 4+ runs 5 times this year. 2 of those have been against the Royals. In fact, his worst start of the year in terms of earned runs allowed was against the Kansas City Royals. And the Royals have their all-righty lineup in there. We'll see what happens. But if they lose tonight, because we're going to go through this doomsday scenario. And so when I put this episode out, I'm hoping some of you that are at the edge of the cliff right now watch this so that we don't have to cycle back and go through this same thing after the game tonight if they do lose. If they do lose, here is how Detroit knocks Kansas City out of the playoffs. And here's all the factors involved. They need to go 7-3 over these next 10 games. The Royals have to go 3-7 or worse. So they can go 7-3 or better. Royals need to go 3-7 or worse. That's for Detroit to make the postseason over Kansas City. Another factor you have to put in here. Minnesota has to play well too, which they have not done in the last 30 games. So even if Detroit does that and Kansas City does that, Minnesota has to play good baseball. So there's the first factor there. So going into tonight, let's say the Tigers win. They sweep Kansas City. That lead goes down to 2 games in the standings, but technically 3 because of the tiebreaker for the end of the season. So they've got that tiebreaker with 9 games to go. The Royals will have the Giants at home for 3 to close out their regular season homestand. And then they're going to have the Nationals for 3 and the Braves for 3. The Tigers are going to go to Baltimore, who they just saw last weekend, but this series will take place at Camden Yards. Then they're going to come back home to take on Tampa Bay, and they'll wrap up the year with the White Sox. I know that White Sox series has made people uncomfortable. That should be a sweep for Detroit, depending on what they're playing for at that point. Minnesota has 2 more against Cleveland, in Cleveland, 3 in Boston, and they'll have 3 against the Orioles at the end of the year. So the toughest schedule of the 3 there. Now, for how those series have to go, Kansas City, for Detroit's perspective here, Kansas City needs to take 1 of 3 against San Francisco. They need to take 1 of 3 against the Nationals, and they need to take 1 of 3 against the Braves. So they need to lose all 3 of those series. In that same conversation, Detroit has to take 2 of 3 against Baltimore on the road. They need to take 2 of 3 against Tampa at home, and they need to take 2 of 3 against the White Sox to close out the year. Now, I understand, as I just brought up, the sweep part of it. If the White Sox sweep or get swept by the Tigers, the Royals need to find 2 wins somewhere in those final 10 games to finish tied with Detroit. And if they finish with the same record, Kansas City gets in, Detroit does not because of that head-to-head tiebreaker. So that extra win can come against San Francisco. That extra win can come against Washington. Basically, the Royals need to avoid their worst stretch of baseball of the season over these next 10 games. That's basically what I'm discussing right now. Their worst stretch of the year, if I'm not mistaken, has been 3-7 because they had the 7-game winning streak or losing streak, and then they won 4 in a row. So that would have been 3-7 over a 10-game stretch with that 7-game losing streak included. So to me, you avoid that. You try to avoid that. The Giants are not playing for anything. The Nationals are not playing for anything. Baltimore is playing for something. Tampa Bay, not so much anymore. White Sox, certainly not at all. So you factor that all in, and that's if Detroit wins tonight. If the Royals find a way to get to Scoobel and win this game, in my opinion, all you have to do is take 2 of 3 against the Giants. You take 2 of 3 against the Giants, that would put you, depending on what happens with Detroit, let's say in a perfect scenario, the Tigers sweep the Orioles, and that'd be a perfect scenario for the Tigers. They sweep the Orioles after the Royals won the series finale tonight, and then the Royals took 2 of 3 against the Giants. They only pick up 1 game, and you're down to 6 games left on the season, and the Royals would then have a 3-game lead with a 4-game technical cushion because of the tiebreaker, with 6 games to go. You take 1 against Washington, 1 against Atlanta, you should be fine at that point. So that's why tonight has a lot riding on it. And if the Royals can win this game, what I just told you right there is irrelevant because that puts Detroit in a tough spot. If Minnesota loses tonight and Kansas City wins, they got a 2.5-game lead on the Minnesota Twins. They do not have the tiebreaker over Minnesota, but they would have a 5-game cushion because of that tiebreaker over Detroit. Now, if they do lose, I am just reiterating, it's still not time to smash the panic button because the Tigers will have to erase a 3-game deficit with 9 games to go. And the Royals do not play the Tigers again. They don't play an American League team after tonight. And they play 2 teams that are not above 500. The Orioles will be playing the Tigers in Camden Yards. Yes, the Orioles are leaking oil a little bit, but still, you feel like the Orioles are going to be favored in a handful of those games. And in fact, game 1, Corbin Burns will be on the bump. And guess what? Tarek Skubal's not pitching in that series because he's pitching tonight against Kansas City. So that's kind of been my description to fans out there that are losing their mind. I understand. We've been here before. Let me be very clear. We have been here before with the Royals in a doomsday scenario, and I can circle just about every single series in which it happened. And there is a direct correlation to those doomsday scenarios happening when the Royals are playing teams they're either chasing or that are actively chasing them. I remember it against the Twins. I remember it against the Guardians. I remember it against the Red Sox. And now the Detroit Tigers for the first time this year. And the Tigers have been the best team in baseball since the middle of August. They've got the number 1 bullpen since the middle of August. This was always going to be a very tough 3-game series, but the Royals can make things very easy on themselves tonight if they come out with the win against Tarek Skubal. The odds are against them, but baseball has seen weirder things. We're going to take our first break of the show. When we come back, let's talk about tonight's game and how big of a test it'll be for the Royals, but also how big of a test it'll be for the Tigers. We'll dive into that next on Locked On Royals. You are tuned into Locked On Royals on the Locked On Podcast Network. I'm your host, Jack Johnson, and you can find me on Twitter or X at JohnnyJ_15. Want to give a shout out to our first sponsor in FanDuel. And you've heard us talk a lot about FanDuel, which is America's number 1 sportsbook. Well, we have something a little different for you because now through September 22nd, all FanDuel customers can bet $5 and get a 3-week free trial of NFL Sunday Ticket from YouTube and YouTube TV. Then with a YouTube TV base plan, you'll be able to watch every regular season Sunday afternoon out-of-market game. All you need is a Google account and a current form of payment, and you can cancel at any time. Just visit FanDuel.com and download America's number 1 sportsbook. And if you're looking for something to put a little bit of money down on tonight, Salvador Perez has tremendous numbers against Tarek Skubal, so you can see the odds of what a home run might be and putting some money down on that. And Alec Marsh has been pretty good over the last 4 to 5 starts as well, so maybe you take the over in innings pitched against the Tigers tonight. We also want to give a shout out to Game Time, which is our title sponsor today. And there's only 4 games left in the regular season at Kauffman Stadium. You got the game tonight, so if you're watching this and I can inspire you to go buy tickets, do so over at Game Time. If you're thinking about going this weekend, I'm going on Saturday. Should be some fantastic crowds because they take on an opponent they don't usually face, and it's a rematch of the 2014 World Series, though none of those players except for Salvador Perez are still playing against one another between these 2 teams. But if you are debating that, you want to go, I urge you to buy tickets over at Game Time. So download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONMLB. That's LOCKEDONMLB for $20 off on your first purchase. Those terms apply. So again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDONMLB for $20 off. Download Game Time today. What time is it? It is game time. Well, as I mentioned in the opening segment, there's a chance that I might bring you a second episode tonight, depending on my schedule. But if not, expect that episode on Sunday. Huge test for the Royals tonight. We are dwindling down in the regular season, and the Royals appear to be limping to the end of this final stretch here. And I don't want to say badly limping because they're 7-8 in September. And they're coming off a road series win against a red-hot Pirates team. They're just playing a team that's hotter than the Pirates and hotter than they are right now, and quite honestly, playing for their lives. But it goes without saying tonight, it's a huge test. You get Tarek Skubal, and Tarek Skubal is going to win the American League Cy Young Award. And we just talked about FanDuel. He's got by far and away the best betting odds to bring home the Cy Young hardware. The Royals have also had Tarek Skubal's number this year. With the exception of one start, which came all the way back in April in Motown, Tarek Skubal has not pitched well against the Royals. Last time out, it was Reagans versus Skubal, And I think Reagans and Skubal faced off before that in Kansas City back in May, and Reagans outdueled Skubal. Reagans also outdueled Skubal the last time around. The Royals have also tagged Skubal for 4 or more runs twice in the 3 starts that he's faced him this year. Now, I'm all about playing odds. I think when you're dealing with somebody like a Tarek Skubal, a Cy Young winner, an ace of a staff, and you've gotten him before, you can look at that and say, hey, the odds will tell you that they'll do it again. Or the odds would tell you, are they really going to get him 3 times in one season when he's pretty much been able to dominate every other lineup? We'll have to see. You also have to go back to last week, in which the Tigers won Game 1 and Game 2 against the Rockies, lining up Tarek Skubal to start the series finale and go for the sweep, and the Rockies won that game. So who knows what we're in for tonight? But there is so much on the line tonight for the comfortability of this Royals fan base. I just talked about the panic button and not letting your hand hover over it just yet. If the Royals win tonight, I think their playoff odds go from 93%, which is what they were at this morning, to about 97%. And if you've been following that every single day, that gives you comfort, which I know for some fans it doesn't. The only thing that'll give you comfort is they officially punched their ticket. But tonight, if the Royals can get Skubal one more time, they basically put the Tigers on the rope, all bloodied up, have blurry vision, just like in a boxing ring. That's what they can do with one win tonight, because that gives you a 5-game cushion over Detroit with 9 games to go. The Tigers have to be perfect, and the Royals have to play their worst baseball of the year. That would basically be the only way it could happen. And the Royals will be playing back-to-back sub-500 teams. It is a gargantuan shift based on a win and a loss tonight. If the Royals win, 5-game cushion. If they lose, 3-game cushion. And you've just been swept by a team that is rolling. You do have an off day to regroup tomorrow. Get ready for the Giants at home. And it's a true off day, as we've talked about before. They go to bed tonight in their own beds. They wake up, enjoy their off day, and go to bed that night and have all the afternoon on Friday before the game. So it's a true off day. And we saw the last time the Royals had that off day when they beat the Guardians to snap their 7-game losing streak. They came back out on Friday and swept the Minnesota Twins. Friday, Saturday, and Sunday. Looked as good as they had, at least pitching-wise, in the second half. So that is a blessing to have not only an off day on Thursday, but an off day on Monday. Though the off day on Monday, they're going to be traveling to Washington. A little bit different there. But tonight, you really feel like you can add one of the final nails in that coffin. No, Detroit's season won't be over technically. Depends what happens with Minnesota. But if you win tonight, and let's say Minnesota loses to Cleveland, you have a 2.5-game cushion on Minnesota, but the Twins would only have a 1.5-game cushion on Detroit with a tougher schedule than what Detroit has to close out the year. So you kind of think that it comes down to a 2-horse race for that final wild card spot. The Royals should feel comfortable with a 5-game cushion for a playoff spot with 9 games to go. And they get one of the worst teams in the National League in that stretch. And one thing I haven't touched on just yet, that Atlanta series gets very entertaining because here's what could happen. Right now, Atlanta is 2 games back of the Mets. If you are rooting for something in the National League, you root with all your might that the New York Mets run away with that final spot. Because right now with the Braves, back 2 games of the Mets, they're fighting for their lives here in the final week and a half of the season. If the Braves get to that Thursday, I think it would be, and they're 4 games out of that wild card spot, they're eliminated. So you could be taking on a Braves team that has nothing to play for. And it's different, and it really feels this way. It's different when you are a playoff team, you were a contender, and you fall short at the end. I don't get the vibe that Atlanta would be going into that final series trying to play spoiler on the Royals. If they had been eliminated, they would feel down about what their season became, them coughing up that lead to the Mets. I think you would see a uninspired ball club. So if you're rooting for something in the National League, and it all starts tonight, you win tonight, You keep the Tigers 5 games back. You hopefully can have a 2.5 game lead over Minnesota. And you look at what's happening in Atlanta. If Atlanta stumbles, and tonight they're on the road against the Reds, they've lost 3 in a row. If they lose and the Mets win, and the Mets are hosting the Nationals tonight, Jose Quintana on the bump for New York, you hope that Atlanta's out of it by the end of the year. And things are not technically pointing that way at this point in time, but they could get there. You know, if the Braves were hanging on and clinging on to a playoff spot against the Mets or over the Mets in that final week, you would see as aggressive as a team as you saw this week to begin this week with the Detroit Tigers. Because once again, you would have a playoff caliber team fighting for their lives. So that's what I'm kind of looking at right now. Big test tonight. If the Royals can get it done, they can have a 5-game lead over Detroit with 9 games to go. We're going to take our final break of the show. When we come back, why are the Royals struggling with runners in scoring position? I'll give you my thoughts next on Locked On Royals. You are tuned into Locked On Royals in the Locked On Podcast Network. I'm your host, Jack Johnson, and you can find me on Twitter or X at JohnnyJ_15. Want to give a shout out to one of our newer sponsors in Arena Club. Now, for most of you guys out there that like collecting cards, the idea of spending $2,000 or more just isn't in the cards. Now, I'm sure you guys love collecting, but we all know that's some serious money to drop. Now, thanks to Slab Packs from arenaclub.com, it's possible to score gem mints for a fraction of their retail price. Every card that you list was hit from last week's Arena Club Slap Pack drop. And Arena Club is the only repack that provides real value, a complete view of all possible cards, and clear hit rates for each one. Now, Arena Club Slap Packs are revolutionizing the repack game with transparency. After your pulls are revealed, they'll immediately be placed in your showroom for safekeeping, selling, trading, or auctioning. Now, right now, you can get 10% off your first slab pack or card purchase by going to arenaclub.com/LockedOnMLB and use code LockedOnMLB. That's arenaclub.com/LockedOnMLB, code LockedOnMLB for 10% off on your first purchase. Last night, it was no surprise that the Royals didn't get the big hit that they needed. On Sunday, they couldn't get the big hit that they needed against the Pirates. Last Wednesday, a week ago today, they couldn't get the big hit against the Yankees. On Monday, I know we're jumping all over the place here, but on Monday, they couldn't get the big hit that they needed late. They were having great opportunities to drive in runs. They're getting first and second, nobody out. They're getting leadoff runners on. I mean, hell, even in the extra innings ghost runner rule, they had Bobby Witt Jr., Salvador Perez, and Michael Massey up, and nobody was even able to move the runner over to third. I mean, clearly an issue right now with driving runners in, and it's not really a surprise as to why. They're missing one of their best hitters with runners in scoring position, and that guy's not going to be coming back anytime soon. So you look at how they can fix that, you know, what approaches they've been taking. I'm not going to sit here and say that they've been pressing. I think they've just been a little bit too eager. That can go hand in hand. That can be the exact same definition. But to me, I think you look at last night, for example, Michael Massey coming up in a bases loaded spot, 1 out, and he swings first pitch, Shelby Miller's slider, and it's a weak grounder to second base, and it's a double play ball. The threat is neutralized. You look at Tommy Pham's at bat. I don't think it was a bad at bat. He just didn't get a great swing on it. You know, you go back to Monday night, first and second, MJ Melendez could theoretically bunt the guys over and set up Maikel Garcia to at least tie the game. None of that happened. MJ Melendez struck out, and Maikel Garcia grounded into 2. So the Tigers have done a great job at dancing around danger. But you do feel like it's only a matter of time at this point that the Royals do get that big hit. They do come through, whether it be somebody at the top of the order or near the bottom of the order. We all know the reason they're struggling is because that's a key part in their lineup that's missing. You know, Vinny Pasquantino, as well as being good with runners in scoring position, he had a lot of sac flies. And last night, with Michael Massey up, all he needed to do was have that sac fly. It sounds simple. Sounds easy. Maybe it sounds like a dumb point. But Vinny Pasquantino in that spot is trying to lift the ball into the air. Maybe Michael Massey was, but he didn't do it. He didn't get a good swing on the ball. To me, I think it comes back to playing a little bit of small ball here. I think if a scenario comes about tonight where you have a runner at second and nobody out, you're facing Tarek Skubal. You need to scratch across as many runs as you can. I'm all right laying down a bunt, even if it's a second inning. I'm anti-bunt for the most time, unless it's the ninth inning and you're trying to get that guy over to third with less than 2 outs. I'm talking about with the struggles like we've seen for the last 5 games or so. You got to find ways to make things simpler. You got to put more pressure on the defense. Force the Tigers to bring the infield in. Because I just don't think you have enough guys in that lineup that deserve to have the right to swing away. For instance, Monday night, first and second, nobody out, MJ Melendez is up. I'm not sure MJ Melendez has earned the right, even with some of the clutch hits that he's had, to just swing away. Not with the struggles the Royals have been going through. You got to get one down. If you're not confident, somebody else has to go up there and get one down. Because you got to tie the game at that point. I know you were going for the big inning, but if you've been struggling, look, you got to find ways to make it easier on the guy behind you. MJ Melendez didn't make it easy on Maikel Garcia. So if it were me, I think tonight, if you have a situation like Tommy Pham leads off the game with a double, I'm not going to bunt Bobby Witt Jr., and I'm not going to take the bat out of his hands. I'm not taking the bat out of the hands of Salvador Perez. But if there's a scenario in the game where, let's see all the righties that are out there. Robbie Grossman's hitting cleanup tonight. There's a leadoff double from Salvador Perez, and it's a one-run game. Bunt Salvador Perez over. Lay one down. Runner at third, one out, drive somebody in. And I know that has not gone well for the Royals, at least of late, and that puts more pressure on the guy behind Robbie Grossman against a guy like Tarek Skubal. But to me, I think you can't be gunning for the big inning if you can't even do the small things right now. A lot of it to me is not coming through with, it's not about guys coming through with 2 outs and the bases loaded. That's a different thing I'm talking about. I believe where they've struggled the most is runner at first, nobody out. Runner at first and second, nobody out. You have to get that runner over. If you have a leadoff single on, worst case, you want to get that guy over to second. It's not to have a leadoff single tonight in the first inning and bunt him over. I'm not saying that. But there are scenarios in which you're chasing a team or it's tied. Let's get those guys in scoring position. Swipe a bag. You got some fast guys out there in the lineup tonight that can swipe the bag. Now, if they can get on base off Tarek Skubal, that's a different thing we're talking about here. But I think you do have to go back to the small ball approach while you're struggling against a team like this. If there's a scenario in the 5th inning or the 6th inning, leadoff double, if it's a one-run game or it's tied, I want that runner over to third. I don't want to risk somebody popping up on the infield, then you ground out to short, and then you strike out. I don't want to see something like that. Tarek Skubal is tough to score off of. You have to be aggressive in trying to scratch across runs against such an elite arm. So why they're struggling, they don't have Vinny Pasquantino, but I think it's been more so about the at-bats that lead up to that big moment. You get bases loaded and 1 out. All right, do your job at that point. But if it's first and second, nobody out, I want to see the runners moved over. I don't want to see somebody who's hitting 220 have a free swinging approach up there. I'm swinging first pitch to see what happens. I think there has to be a little bit more of a patient approach, not trying to press too much, not being too eager, and just worry about moving those runners over and let the next guy drive those guys in. Well, that's going to do it for another edition of Locked On Royals in the Locked On Podcast Network. I've been your host, Jack Johnson. You can always find me on Twitter or X at JohnnyJ_15. Thank you for making Locked On Royals your first listen today. For your second, find Locked On MLB. Prepare for the Fall Classic with Sully, who has it all covered every single day. Find Locked On MLB on YouTube or wherever you get your podcast. Now, we might have one more episode later tonight after the game, so if we do, we'll be fully recapping the series finale against Detroit and preview the upcoming series against the Giants. But if not, we'll have our extra episode on Sunday night. But until then, you take it easy, Kansas City.